Hello, faculty of Bryant Elementary School. I hope that you are as excited as I am, to dig into this data and to engage in a data overview of our scholars here at Bryant Elementary School. I know that data isn't the most favorite topic of some of us, and sometimes it isn't for me. It's hard looking at student progress and sometimes thinking, well, what have I done or what could I have done to change what I see in this data? And those are important things to say to yourself because it forces us to reflect and to make those necessary changes. So we're going to go ahead and get started by looking at our purpose for today. Our purpose is to review demographic and student achievement data for Bryant, and it's measured by the CRCT test, now known as the Georgia Milestones. But of course, we don't have our milestones data in yet, but when we do, we're going to meet as a group again, disaggregate that data, and see what kind of story it tells. But for today, we're going to be looking at the story that our CRCT historical data tells us. We're going to look at highlighting strengths as well as weaknesses, and then emphasizing a key area that we need to focus on for improvement. And the only way for us to improve student achievement, to grow as a school, is to look at the data and to determine what is our data telling us and how can we use that information to move forward with our students. So let's go ahead and get started by looking at some demographic data from the 2014-15 school year. As you can see, there were 957 students included in this data, and that number has stayed relatively the same for us, give or take a few throughout the year, but on average, we've had about 957 students each year for the last several years. And you can see that of those 957 students, 0% are Asian, 66% are Black, 29% are Hispanic, 2% are multiracial, and 3% are white or Caucasian. And you may ask, why is that important? But I'm just giving you this information so you can begin to form a picture of who it is we're talking about when we begin to look at our data. So to look at our students again as a whole, again, there were 957 students, and those students are in different programs or in different student groups. And that's just important to know when you're looking at the data. Where are these numbers coming from? How are they achieving? What programs are they receiving in order to get to where they are? So we have 67% that are economically disadvantaged. We have 10% that are EIP, 11% that are English language learners. We have 3% that are target or advanced learning, and then we have 9% that are students with disabilities. And I do have the acronyms down at the bottom, so kind of read through those one more time for those who may not be in the classroom and aren't as familiar with some of the terminology that we use, because I do want you to be familiar with those terms, because throughout the presentation they won't always be spelled out. So just kind of keep those in mind as we go through the presentation. All right, another piece of data that I feel is important is to look at our transiency rate. And it hasn't changed a lot over the last several years, but it is important to note that some of the scholars that we begin with at the beginning of the year are not the same scholars that we test at the end of the year. And we've all felt that way. We get that scholar on the day before testing is supposed to start, and we know they're going to be included in our data now based on the CCRPI, and we just have to move forward. We have to then look at the data when it comes back, look at those students that we got at the end of the year, and determine what can we do to best support them while they're here with us at our school. So I just felt it was important to include these numbers to give you an even clearer picture of who it is that you're working with. But let's go ahead and move now into our actual CRCT data. As you can see here, I've combined the reading and the ELA, and I did that for Bryant purposes because I know we see the value and the importance of having a seamless instruction of reading and writing coming together. So I did want you to look at that data together versus in isolation of each other. We are going to do it that way, but first to see it together, since that's where we place importance on our instruction and the teaching of the Georgia standards. But as you can see, each year there were about 450 students that were tested, and that stayed relatively the same over the last 3 to 5 years. We've seen a steady enrollment here at Bryant. But as you can see, our fifth graders, something to cheer about. They are doing very well. They've stayed consistently in the 90s. We did have a 2% drop in 2014, but at this time I don't think it's anything to be alarmed about because we are staying relatively high when we look at these numbers of reading and ELA together. Our third and fourth grade students are not far behind. They're in the 80s. They've stayed consistent with being in the 85s and 88s. But our next steps for those students are to see, well, what can we do to move even more of the students into meeting and into exceeding, that are not meeting standards or who are only meeting standards. So there is always room for growth. There's always room for opportunity. And that's why we're looking at this data to say, okay, we're doing well, but how can we do even better? Okay, so now we're going to look at a breakdown of each of the grade levels by subject, starting with third grade reading. And what I have here is, and you'll see this on the next several slides, the Cobb County data for the last 5 years, as well as the Bryant. And then 4 of our major student groups here at Bryant. We have the Black, Hispanic, SWD, and ELL students. And I have their data disaggregated for you as well, because those are student groups here that make up a large portion of the students that we serve. So when looking at our data for third grade, the district average has decreased slightly, just a couple of points over the last couple of years, but the Bryant third grade students continue to show an increase in reading. We did have a 1% decrease the 2013-14 school year, but again, it's not something that I would be alarmed about unless we continue to see that decrease in our overall Bryant average. And I think it's also important to note from our third grade data that there was a 20% increase in students with disabilities over the last several years. If you look at the data, how it's increased over the last several years, we have seen increase. It was slight at first, but then from the 2012-13 to the 2013-14 school year, we did see a 70% increase, which is something to be excited about. And now looking at our fourth grade reading data, we can see that each student group has made steady gains in fourth grade reading and has decreased the gap between Cobb County and Bryant's overall performance. It actually was closed by about 5%. And it should also be noted that 94% of students with disabilities and 92% of our English language learners met or exceeded expectations. So that is exciting to see that growth. We're going to move right along now to our fifth grade students. And as you can see from our fifth grade data, that Bryant's fifth grade students have shown consistent increase in their overall reading performance since the 2010 school year. Although they're still performing slightly behind the Cobb County average, it is exciting to see that we're steadily growing instead of decreasing. And our Black students have also shown an increase in their overall performance, and the students with disability did have a slight decrease from last year, from the 2012-13 to the 2013-14 school year. So that is something to take note of and to kind of keep in the back of your minds as you're looking at the data. And this is just an overview of the data I just explained to you. I included it so you can have a reference to go back and look at later. Here you can see Bryant's Lexile levels, and I thought this was important to note because it's based off that reading data that you just saw. So as you can see, we are not where we need to be as far as having more of our scholars at or above those cut scores, which are listed below at the bottom of the slide. So what that tells us is that a majority of our students are meeting standards, but they're not exceeding standards. So therefore, our Lexile levels are slightly lower than they could be. Here you can see Bryant's fifth grade Lexile levels compared with Cobb County's overall fifth grade. And I wanted to include this because this is where we end here in the elementary school. Before we send them off to middle school, this is the Lexile level they have. And as you can see, we have each year been behind the Cobb County Lexile averages. So that is something we need to work on. And again, it goes back to moving more of those students who are just meeting standards into the exceed standards. And of course, those not meeting standards, we want to move towards meeting the standards. Here you can see our third grade ELA data, and we're going to look at our ELA data for third, fourth, and fifth grade. And based on the data, we can see for our third grade scholars here at Bryant Elementary that the student groups have increased performance by at least 5%, while our ELL students have increased by 15%. So each student group has shown an increase. And that is exciting because English language learners have a hard time because they aren't familiar with the language. So to see an increase over the last several years after the 2010-11 school year is exciting. We did see a slight drop in 2012, but we picked back up in 2013. And here, looking at our fourth grade data, we can see that students with disabilities showed a 13% increase in English language arts, and our ELL students increased by 3%. And students identified as Black maintained, while Hispanics and all students decreased in performance. So that is something to note as well, that we've seen a slight decrease. It wasn't much, but it is. We don't want to see our data go down ever. So that is something to take note of. And then here with our fifth grade students, the fifth grade student performance in English language arts decreased in all areas with the exception of students identified as Black. The Black student group continues to progress to its previous performance level. So we were at 95, we dropped a little, and then it went back down in 2012-13, but we are continuing to improve that, and we're staying pretty steady with that student group. And this is just an overview of the information I just presented to you. And here you have the math data. And this data is also important to kind of give you a snapshot of all the grade levels at once. Again, it was about 450 students that were tested each year. But as you can see, our fifth graders took a slight drop in 2014. However, it is important to note that our fourth graders have shown a steady increase, as well as our third graders from the 2013 to 2014 school year. But this is just to kind of give you an overview of the data. So now let's look at each grade level separately, starting with our third grade students. In third grade math, our scores decreased for Cobb County, but increased here at Bryant by 12%. And all groups of students showed an increase with the exception of students with disabilities, who decreased by 10% from the 2012-13 school year. For fourth grade, let's go ahead and move to fourth grade. The overall performance of Cobb County students decreased again, while Bryant students increased. So that is exciting. Not that Cobb County is decreasing, but that here at Bryant we're seeing a steady increase. Fourth grade students with disabilities showed a 17% increase from the 2012 to 2013 school year. And so let's move along now to our fifth grade data. Our fifth grade data at Bryant Elementary shows a decrease in fifth grade mathematics scores in all areas with the exception of a 1% increase in the students identified as Black. So we have seen decreases in our fifth grade math, even though overall we're doing okay. But when you look at the data in isolation, based on our student groups, it's not exactly where we would want it to be. We've seen a decrease with Hispanic, SWD, and ELL students over the last several years. And this is just to give you an overview of the data to show how our students are performing. But I'll have that in there so you can go back and look at it later. So, based on the data at Bryant Elementary School, we do have specific weaknesses in reading, English language arts, and math with our students with disabilities. And we see that year after year. And especially in math, we see a big discrepancy between our other student groups when compared to our SWD student groups. So based on the data, I just feel we should put more focus on strengthening the support that this group of students receive. We need to ensure that it's effective, standards-based, grade-level instruction that reflects the same rigor as our Black and our Hispanic student groups. And also for our SWD student group, it's inconsistent. The data is inconsistent from one year to the next. One year we see an increase, the next there's a decrease. So we need to spend some time focusing on what can we do to determine which programs to keep and basically which ones to eliminate. We need to look and see, well, each year, what do we use to cause the increase? What do we use to cause the decrease? So that takes me to your task. Your task is to determine which instructional programs are currently in place for our students with disabilities. We're going to collect the data from the programs, analyze, interpret, and disaggregate the data to determine the effectiveness of the programs. Then we're going to determine which programs to keep in place and which should be eliminated. However, any programs that remain should be used with fidelity, and the data should be collected monthly at our monthly data team meetings that we already have in place. And any changes to our instructional program will occur based on the needs of the students and, of course, on the results of the data that we collect. So I hope you're excited. I hope this brief overview gave you an understanding of where we stand as far as data is concerned at Bryant Elementary School, and that we continue to move forward and continue to have these data discussions so that we can know what's working for us, what isn't working, and which student groups need our attention. Thank you for the opportunity to share this data overview with you.